If you're just starting Standoff 2, or you've already been playing for a while, but still feel like you're losing gunfights, missing easy shots, or simply don't know what settings and strategies you should be using, then this guide is for you. We're going to go through everything you need to know to improve your gameplay, starting with your settings and moving into aim, sensitivity, crosshair placement, movement, economy, teamwork, grenades, map awareness, positioning, and some of the most common mistakes that beginners make. Keep in mind that you don't need to copy everything exactly. The goal isn't to make your settings identical to mine or another players. Instead, you want to understand what each setting actually does and adjust it to what feels comfortable for you. Let's get started. First, let's fix your settings. Go into your settings and click on region. Choose the region that's closest to your actual location. This setting is important because your region can affect the server you connect to, which can have a major impact on your ping. Having lower and more stable ping makes your game feel much more responsive. Your shots can register more consistently, movement feels smoother, and you're less likely to have situations where you clearly hit someone on your screen, but the game doesn't seem to register it properly. Obviously, you can't completely eliminate ping because it depends on your internet connection and the server, but choosing the appropriate region is a simple thing you can do to make sure you're getting the best connection possible. So don't skip this setting. Now let's move on to your view model. You have options such as Classic and Standard. Standard makes the weapon and arms appear larger on your screen. While this might look nice to some players, having a large weapon model can take up more of your screen and potentially block part of your vision. Classic is much smaller and gives you more space to see what's happening around you. This is especially useful when you're holding an angle and an enemy suddenly appears near the edge of your screen. The less unnecessary space your weapon takes up, the easier it can be to see opponents. Personally, I would recommend trying Classic first and playing a few matches with it. If you prefer Standard, there's nothing wrong with using it. The most important thing is that your view isn't making it harder for you to see enemies. Next, we have HUD visibility. There's honestly not much to explain here. Set it to whatever feels comfortable for you. Now for the last setting in this section, switch to picked up weapon. Basically, this controls whether your character automatically switches to a weapon you pick up from the ground. Turn this off immediately. Video settings. Now let's move over to the video settings. For graphics quality, your main priority should be performance. If you have a powerful device that can maintain high FPS without problems, you can increase your graphics settings. But if you're playing on an older or weaker phone, don't be afraid to lower the graphics. A lot of beginners make the mistake of prioritizing graphics quality because higher settings look better, but you're playing a competitive shooter. Smooth gameplay is much more important than making the game look slightly prettier. Higher FPS can make your movements feel smoother, make aiming feel more responsive, and help you react faster during gunfights. So always favor stable FPS over visual quality. If your game constantly drops frames, lowering your graphics settings can make a huge difference. You should also pay attention to whether your device gets hot during long sessions. If your phone starts overheating, performance can become less consistent, and your FPS may drop. So don't only test your settings for 1 minute. Play a few matches and see how your device actually performs during a longer session. Now we have an important setting: show eliminated characters. What this setting does is remove the character models of players after they've been eliminated. If you leave the models visible, they can remain on the ground and potentially block part of your vision. Imagine you're holding an angle and an eliminated player's model is sitting directly in front of you. An enemy moves behind that model, and for a moment you can't clearly see them. That's obviously not ideal. Turning this setting on can help keep your screen cleaner and make it easier to see what's actually important. When you're playing a competitive game, even small visual distractions can matter. Controls and HUD. Now let's move on to your controls. Your HUD is extremely personal. Don't blindly copy someone else's layout just because they're a good player. A professional player might have a completely different hand position, device size, or playstyle compared to you. Instead, arrange your buttons so that you can reach everything comfortably. You should be able to move, aim, shoot, crouch, jump, reload, switch weapons, and use grenades without your fingers constantly getting in the way. One of the best things you can do is enter a practice mode or deathmatch after changing your HUD. Don't immediately jump into a serious match. Spend a few minutes moving around and testing whether every button is easy to reach. If you constantly miss a button, move it. If something is blocking your view, move it. Your HUD should feel natural enough that you don't have to think about where your buttons are. Sensitivity. Now let's talk about sensitivity. Sensitivity controls how quickly your camera moves when you swipe. Higher sensitivity allows you to turn around and perform flicks faster. However, if your sensitivity is too high, small movements can become difficult to control. You might try to aim at someone's head and accidentally swipe past them. Lower sensitivity gives you more precise control, but turning around can take longer. So there is a balance. There's no magical sensitivity that makes everyone better. Don't copy a professional player's sensitivity and expect your aim to instantly improve. Their sensitivity works for them because they've spent a huge amount of time playing with it. Instead, find something that feels comfortable for you. A good way to test your sensitivity is to enter deathmatch. Try tracking enemies. Try turning around quickly. Try performing small adjustments. If you're constantly overshooting enemies, your sensitivity might be too high. If you struggle to turn quickly or track enemies moving across your screen, it might be too low. Make small adjustments rather than completely changing everything at once. Once you find something comfortable, stick with it for a while. Constantly changing sensitivity can actually make improvement harder because you're never giving yourself enough time to build muscle memory. Crosshair. Your crosshair is another setting you shouldn't ignore. You can customize the size, style, color, and other properties. I recommend keeping your crosshair relatively small. A smaller crosshair can make it easier to focus on the enemy's head and make precise adjustments. But don't make it so small that you can't see it. You want something that remains visible against different backgrounds. You can also choose between dynamic and static crosshairs. The main difference is that a dynamic crosshair changes or moves depending on your movement and actions, while a static crosshair stays in one position. Try both and see which one helps you understand your aim better. For the color, choose whatever you can clearly see. Bright colors such as green, blue, or red can work well depending on the map and your screen. The most important thing is visibility. Aim. Now let's get into one of the biggest factors separating beginners from experienced players: aim. Having good aim isn't simply about moving your crosshair quickly. It's about controlling your movement, placing your crosshair correctly, understanding recoil, and knowing where an enemy is likely to appear. One of the biggest mistakes beginners make is looking at the ground while moving around. Try to keep your crosshair around head level. Think about where an enemy's head would appear if they walked around the corner. Then keep your crosshair there. That way, when someone appears, you only need to make a small adjustment instead of moving your entire screen upward. This is called crosshair placement, and it's one of the easiest things you can start practicing immediately. Good crosshair placement can make your aim look much better without requiring faster reactions. Instead of reacting after seeing an enemy, you're already prepared for them. Practice your aim. If you want better aim, you have to practice. Deathmatch is one of the easiest ways to do this. Don't worry too much about your score while practicing. Focus on your technique. Try keeping your crosshair at head level. Practice tracking enemies. Practice stopping before shooting. Practice controlling recoil. And most importantly, pay attention to your mistakes. If you keep missing because your crosshair is too low, fix that. If you're constantly overflicking, adjust your sensitivity or practice smaller movements. If you're losing fights because you panic and spray everywhere, slow yourself down. You don't need to become amazing in one day. Aim improves through repetition. The more consistently you practice good habits, the more natural they become. Movement. Aim isn't everything. Your movement also has a huge impact on gunfights. One common beginner mistake is standing completely still while shooting. Being stationary makes you an easy target. You should learn how to move while fighting without destroying your own accuracy. You can also use movement to make yourself harder to hit. For example, instead of standing in the exact same position while holding an angle, you can reposition after taking a shot or after revealing your location. But don't constantly move for no reason. Movement should have a purpose. If you're holding an angle, focus on keeping your crosshair in the right place. If you're attacking, use movement to make yourself harder to hit. And if you've already been spotted, don't continue standing in an obvious location. Managing the economy. Now let's talk about one of the most important parts of Standoff 2, the economy. One of the biggest mistakes beginners make is spending all their money every single round. You might lose a round, then immediately buy another expensive weapon. You lose again, buy again. Eventually, you have almost nothing left. Now you're stuck with poor equipment while the other team has enough money for weapons and utilities. Instead, learn when to save. For example, if you lose the pistol round and your team has very little money, sometimes the best decision is to play an eco round. You save your money instead of buying expensive equipment. Then, when the next round starts, you have enough money for a proper purchase. The goal isn't simply to buy something every round. The goal is to make sure your team has the resources it needs for important rounds. A strong economy can completely change a match. Sometimes sacrificing one round can give you a much better chance of winning the next several. Avoid constantly force buying just because you don't want to lose another round. Think ahead. Ask yourself, if I spend all my money right now and lose, what will I have next round? That one question can prevent a lot of bad purchases. Coordinate with your teammates. Standoff 2 is a tactical shooter, so teamwork matters. You can have incredible aim and still lose matches if your team constantly plays separately. If you're playing with friends, communication becomes much easier. You can call out enemy positions, coordinate pushes, tell teammates when you're rotating, and plan your utility. But even if you're playing with random players, you can still work together. Pay attention to where your teammates are going. If 3 teammates are attacking one side, don't randomly run to the opposite side unless you have a reason. Support your team. If a teammate is fighting, you can potentially trade the kill. If someone is holding an important position, don't abandon them without a reason. Your goal isn't to get the most kills every round. Your goal is to help your team win. Stick with your team. It can be difficult to stay coordinated when you're playing with random people, but staying relatively close to your teammates can be extremely useful, especially if you're still learning the game. If you move together, you have more players watching different angles. If one teammate gets attacked, another player may be close enough to help. This also creates opportunities for trades. For example, if your teammate enters a room and gets eliminated immediately, you may be able to eliminate the enemy who killed them. That's much better than having your teammate enter alone while everyone else is on the other side of the map. However, staying together doesn't mean standing directly on top of each other. If everyone stands in the exact same spot, one grenade or one spray can cause massive damage. Instead, stay close enough to support each other while covering different angles. Become comfortable with different weapons. Standoff 2 has a variety of weapons, and you shouldn't rely on only one. Rifles are obviously extremely important, but you should also become comfortable with pistols, SMGs, and shotguns. Pistols are especially important because pistol rounds can completely change the beginning of a match. You should understand how your chosen pistol behaves and learn to make your shots count. SMGs can be useful in situations where you need mobility and close-range firepower. Shotguns can be powerful in close quarters, but they require good positioning because their effectiveness drops when the enemy is farther away. The point isn't that you need to become a professional with every weapon immediately. Instead, learn what each weapon is good at. Understand its range. Understand its recoil. Understand when you should and shouldn't use it. That knowledge gives you more options during a match. Map awareness. Game sense doesn't appear instantly. You build it by playing. One of the most important parts of game sense is understanding the map. Learn the important locations. Learn common angles. Learn where enemies usually stand. Learn the routes players commonly take. Once you understand the map, you can start predicting what the enemy is going to do. For example, if you know that the enemy team has several players controlling one side of the map, you might realize that another area is probably less defended. That gives your team an opportunity to rotate or flank. But don't blindly push every time you think an area is empty. Listen, watch the minimap. Pay attention to your teammates. Look at where enemies have already been seen. Information is extremely valuable. Taking map control. Map control is another important concept. If your team controls more areas of the map, the enemy has fewer safe places to move. This can make their options predictable. For example, if your team controls one side and knows that the enemy isn't there, you can focus your attention on the remaining areas where they might appear. But map control doesn't mean rushing forward without thinking. Take space carefully, clear angles, check common positions, and communicate what you see. If you take control of an area and then immediately give it away for no reason, you've wasted the advantage. Grenades. Now let's talk about grenades. Grenades aren't just extra items you carry around. They're tactical tools. A smoke grenade can block an important sightline. This can allow your team to cross an open area without being exposed to an enemy holding a long angle. Smoke can also be useful when planting or defusing the bomb. Flashbangs can temporarily disrupt enemies and give your team an opportunity to attack. But don't throw flashes randomly. Think about where the enemy is. Think about where the flash will bounce. And most importantly, make sure you're not blinding your own teammates when they are about to enter a fight. Frag grenades can be useful for clearing common positions. If you know an enemy is hiding around a corner, throwing a grenade before entering can force them to move or take damage. The key is to use utility with a purpose. Don't throw every grenade as soon as the round begins just because you have them. Save them for situations where they can actually create an advantage. Positioning. Your position during a gunfight matters almost as much as your aim. A common beginner mistake is standing in the middle of an open area. That gives enemies multiple angles to attack you from. Instead, try to use cover whenever possible. Cover gives you something to retreat behind if you start taking damage. It also reduces the number of directions enemies can attack you from. When holding an angle, think about how exposed you are. If you can only be attacked from one direction, that's usually much safer than standing somewhere where 3 different players can see you. You should also avoid repeating the exact same position over and over. If an enemy sees you holding a specific angle and you return to that exact position immediately, they may already be prepared for you. Change your position when appropriate. Don't always chase kills. Another common mistake is chasing enemies just because they're low health. Sometimes the best decision is to stay alive. Imagine you've already eliminated 2 enemies and your team has a huge advantage. You don't need to sprint across the entire map looking for another kill. You can simply hold a strong position and force the remaining enemies to make the next move. The longer you stay alive, the more pressure you put on the enemy. Remember, kills are useful, but winning the round is the actual objective. Learn from your mistakes. Every match is an opportunity to improve. After a bad round, don't simply blame your teammates. Ask yourself what you could have done differently. Did you push too aggressively? Was your crosshair too low? Did you reload at the wrong time? Did you ignore an important sound cue? Did you use all your grenades too early? Did you rotate too late? These questions help you identify patterns. You don't have to review every single round of every match. Even noticing one repeated mistake can make a difference. If you keep dying because you peek the same angle without using utility, change that habit. If you keep losing aim duels because you're shooting before your crosshair is properly placed, slow down. Improvement comes from identifying mistakes and correcting them. Watch better players. Another great way to improve is by watching experienced players. You don't have to copy everything they do. Instead, pay attention to their decision-making. Ask yourself, why did they rotate? Why did they hold that angle? Why did they use that grenade? Why did they stop pushing? Why did they choose that weapon? Watching skilled players can teach you things that you may not notice while playing yourself. You can also learn common strategies, positions, grenade lineups, and ways to approach different situations. But remember, watching someone isn't enough. You still need to apply what you learn in your own games. Don't panic. One of the biggest differences between beginners and experienced players is how they react under pressure. When you're suddenly attacked, it's easy to panic. You might start spraying randomly, jumping around, switching weapons, or making unnecessary movements. Try to stay calm. If you see an enemy, focus on your crosshair. Control your movement. Take the shot. If you miss, adjust. You don't need to rush every decision. Sometimes staying calm for 1 extra second is enough to win the fight. Don't reload too much. Another small habit that can make a big difference is unnecessary reloading. You eliminate one enemy and immediately reload, even though you still have plenty of bullets. Then another enemy appears. Now you're stuck in the reload animation. Only reload when you actually have a safe opportunity. After a fight, quickly check your surroundings. If you're safe, reload. If enemies could still be nearby, consider keeping your weapon ready. This is especially important when you're attacking multiple enemies. Know when to retreat. Being aggressive can be useful, but knowing when to stop is just as important. If you take damage and you're in a bad position, you don't always have to continue fighting. Sometimes backing away and repositioning is the smarter decision. If you have already been spotted, changing your angle can make the enemy expect you somewhere else. Retreating isn't being scared. It's making a better tactical decision. The goal is to survive and win the round, not to prove that you can win every single gunfight. Practice with a purpose. When you enter deathmatch, don't just run around hoping your aim improves. Give yourself specific goals. For one game, focus entirely on crosshair placement. For another, focus on recoil control. Then practice tracking. Then practice movement. This makes your practice much more useful. You can also warm up before playing competitive matches. Spend a few minutes getting comfortable with your sensitivity and weapon control. That way, your first serious round isn't also your warm-up. Final tips. Before we finish, here are a few final things to remember. Keep your settings comfortable. Prioritize stable FPS. Use a sensitivity that you can control. Keep your crosshair visible. Practice crosshair placement. Learn recoil. Use movement intelligently. Manage your economy. Play around your teammates. Use grenades with a purpose. Learn the maps. Pay attention to enemy patterns. Don't chase unnecessary kills. And most importantly, be patient. You aren't going to become an amazing Standoff 2 player after one deathmatch. Improvement takes time. Some games you'll play incredibly well. Other games you'll feel like you can't hit anything. That's completely normal. The important part is recognizing what went wrong and trying to fix it in the next game. If your aim is bad today, practice. If your movement is bad, work on it. If your game sense is weak, watch better players and learn the maps. If you keep making the same mistake, identify it and deliberately stop doing it. Over time, these small improvements start adding up. Eventually, things that once required a lot of thought become automatic. Your crosshair naturally stays at head level. You instinctively check common angles. You know when to rotate. You know when to save. You know when to push and when to back away. And that's when you start seeing a major difference in your gameplay. Standoff 2 isn't only about having the fastest reactions. It's about combining aim, movement, positioning, decision-making, teamwork, and game sense. Master those areas one by one, and you'll become a much more consistent player. So don't worry about becoming perfect immediately. Focus on improving one thing at a time. Fix your settings. Find your sensitivity. Practice your aim. Learn the maps. Understand your economy. Use your utility. Play with your team. Learn from your mistakes. And most importantly, keep playing. With enough practice, you'll notice how much you improved. Flanking. Let's talk about flanking. Flanking means attacking the enemy team from the side or from behind instead of fighting them head-on. Imagine the enemy team is focused on your teammates. They're aiming toward one direction, watching the main entrance, holding an angle, and expecting the fight to come from the front. But instead of walking directly into that fight, you take another route. You rotate around them. You move through a different path. And suddenly, you're behind them. That is a flank. And the reason flanking is so powerful is simple. People can only look in so many directions at once. If the enemy is already fighting your teammates, their attention is somewhere else. They might be looking at your teammate. They might be listening for footsteps from the front. They might be holding an angle and completely ignoring their backside. And if you appear behind them at the right moment, you can often get a free kill before they even understand what happened. This is one of the biggest advantages of flanking. You're not necessarily winning because your aim is better. You're winning because you created an unfair situation. Instead of giving your enemy a normal 1-versus-1 duel, you're attacking them while they're distracted. And that is extremely powerful. But there's something important to understand. Flanking is not just running behind the enemy as fast as possible. There is a difference between a good flank and a bad flank. A bad flank is when you leave your team at the wrong time, take a long route, make a ton of noise, and arrive after the fight is already over. You might finally reach the enemy backline, only to discover that your teammates are already dead and the enemy team is waiting for you. That isn't a successful flank. A good flank is about timing. You want your teammates to create pressure from one direction while you attack from another. Think of it like this. Your teammates are the distraction. You are the surprise. The enemy is forced to focus on your teammates, and that gives you an opportunity to attack. For example, imagine your team is fighting 3 enemies around a building. Your teammates are making noise and taking shots from the front. Instead of joining them immediately, you rotate around the building. You stay quiet. You avoid exposing yourself unnecessarily. And while the enemy is focused on your teammates, you come around the back. Now the enemy has a huge problem. They were prepared for one direction, but suddenly, you're attacking from another. This is why flanking can feel completely overpowered. You're changing the conditions of the fight, but flanking isn't free. Now, I want to correct one thing that a lot of players misunderstand. Flanking is powerful, but it does not mean that it requires nothing to practice. In fact, good flanking requires several skills. You need to understand the map. You need to know where the common routes are. You need to understand where the enemy is likely to rotate. You need to know when the enemy is distracted. And most importantly, you need to understand timing. If you flank too early, the enemy might still be watching your direction. If you flank too late, your teammates might already be dead. And if you flank at the wrong time, you might completely abandon your team for no reason. So don't think of flanking as, I'm going to run behind them. Think of it as, where is the enemy's attention right now, and how can I attack from somewhere they aren't expecting? That mindset is much more useful. When should you flank? So, when should you actually go for a flank? One of the best opportunities is when the enemy is heavily committed to a fight. If you can clearly tell that the enemy team is focused on your teammates, that's your opportunity. Another good situation is when you know the enemy has moved away from an area. For example, maybe you saw 2 enemies rotate toward your teammate. That might leave their previous position vulnerable. You can use that information to move around them. Another great opportunity is when your team has already created pressure. If your teammates are pushing from the front, the enemy is naturally going to focus on stopping that push. That creates space for you. But remember, don't flank just because you can. Sometimes the best play is simply staying with your team. If your teammates are about to win a fight and you have a clear shot from your current position, don't waste 10 seconds running around the map just because you want a fancy flank. The goal isn't to make the play look impressive. The goal is to win the fight. Now let's talk about peeking. The second mechanic we need to talk about is peeking. Peeking is when you move out from behind cover to see an area, gather information, or take a fight, and then return to safety. It sounds simple. You move out. You look. You shoot if necessary. And you move back. But peeking is one of the most important mechanics in a tactical shooter. Why? Because information is extremely valuable. Remember what we talked about earlier. Information gives you options. If you don't know where the enemy is, you're forced to guess. But if you peek and discover an enemy holding an angle, suddenly you know exactly where they are. You can react. You can reposition. You can call it out to your teammates. Or you can prepare to fight them. And sometimes, a peek can even give you an easy kill. Maybe the enemy is standing in the open. Maybe they're reloading. Maybe they're looking somewhere else. Maybe they aren't expecting anyone to appear. A quick peek can turn that information into a kill. But here's the important part. Peeking isn't only about getting kills. A lot of newer players make the mistake of thinking every peek needs to result in a kill. It doesn't. Sometimes, the purpose of your peek is simply to gather information. You might peek a corner, see two enemies, and immediately retreat. You didn't get a kill, but you learned something incredibly important. You now know where two enemies are. That information can completely change your next decision. You can tell your teammates. You can avoid that angle. You can throw utility. You can rotate. Or you can create a plan to attack them. So don't judge every peek by how many kills you get. Judge it by what you learned. Don't wide swing everything. Another important part of peeking is understanding how much of your body you're exposing. If you simply run completely out of cover every time you peek, you're giving the enemy a huge target. Instead, you want to expose as little as necessary. Peek just enough to gather information. If you see nothing, you can return to cover. If you see an enemy, you can decide whether you want to fight. This is much safer than blindly running into an angle. And remember, cover is your friend. If you are standing behind a wall, the enemy can't shoot you through that wall in most situations. But the second you expose yourself, you become vulnerable. So use your cover intelligently. Peek. Gather information. Take your shot if the opportunity is good. Then return to safety. Don't stand in the open longer than you need to. Different kinds of peeks. There are also different ways you can approach a peek. You can perform a quick peek simply to gather information. You can take a more aggressive peek when you believe the enemy is vulnerable. You can jiggle around an angle to try to bait a shot. Or you can commit to a wider swing when you believe you have an advantage. The important thing is understanding why you're peeking. Before you move out from cover, ask yourself, what am I trying to accomplish? Are you looking for information? Are you trying to get a kill? Are you baiting a shot? Are you trying to force the enemy to reveal their position? Or are you simply checking whether the area is safe? Having a purpose makes your peeks much more effective.